Welcome to our fun little study group for PP 5375 Economic Analysis for Public Policy and Management. These are the readings from Section 04, measuring economic welfare consumer and producer surplus. So today, we're really taking a big step, aren't we? I mean, up to now in this course, we've mostly been doing what they call positive analysis, describing how things work.
Right, like if demand goes up, what happens to price, that sort of thing.
Exactly, mapping out the mechanics. But the sources we're digging into today, these core readings on welfare economics, they give us the tools for something else, for normative analysis.
Which is all about judging outcomes, asking, well, what should be? Is this policy actually good for society overall?
Precisely. And the key tools are consumer surplus and producer surplus. They let us actually put dollar figures on the gains and losses when markets change, or more often when the government steps in.
It's really foundational for evaluating public policy. Welfare economics at its heart is about looking at how resources get allocated and how that affects, economic well-being.
So what's the mission here?
Well, first, we kind of set the stage. The competitive market equilibrium. That's our benchmark, our ideal, maximum possible welfare for society.
Okay, the starting point.
Then we get the method, the actual math. How to calculate who wins, who loses, and by exactly how much in dollars whenever some policy messes with that perfect benchmark.
And that how much often includes this thing called deadweight loss, right? The cost to society.
Exactly, deadweight loss. And consumer and producer surplus are the building blocks for calculating all of it.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we get into the policy fights, we need to nail down these core ideas. Consumer surplus, CS, and producer surplus, PS. They measure the aggregate net benefit.
That's the term, yeah. It's basically how much better off people are because they got to participate in that market transaction. It's a way to make things like utility or profit concrete, monetary.
So consumer surplus. What is it, simply put?
It's the bargain the buyer gets. Simple as that. It's the difference between the absolute maximum price a consumer would have been willing to shell out for something.
Which we see on the demand curve.
Exactly. That's captured by the demand curve.
Yeah.
And the price they actually pay in the market. The sources use a good example. Market prices, say, $5.
Okay.
Consumer A, maybe they really wanted it, would have paid $10. So they get $5 of surplus, like a $5 win. Consumer B, maybe they valued it at $7. They still buy it for $5, so they net $2 of surplus.
And consumer C, who only valued it at exactly $5.
They buy it but get zero net benefit, zero surplus. They pay exactly what it was worth to them.
Okay, so that's individual surplus. But we usually talk about the whole market.
We do. And when you add up all those individual surpluses, for every single consumer buying the good, you get the total consumer surplus. Visually, on the graph, it's that whole area stuck between the demand curve way up high and the market price line down below.
It's a total sort of extra value consumers get beyond what they had to spend.
Precisely. Their total gain from being able to trade in that market.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And producer surplus is just the mirror image for sellers.
Pretty much, yeah. Same logic. Producer surplus, PS, is the difference between the price the producer receives from the market.
The market price line again?
Right. And the minimum price they would have accepted, which is their marginal cost of producing that unit. And we know the supply curve reflects that marginal cost.
So producers whose costs are lower than the market price get a benefit.
They do. And again, adding up all those benefits for all the producers in the market, you get the total producer surplus. That's the area above the supply curve, but below the market price line.
And the source material mentions this isn't just profit.
Good point. It includes total profit, yes, but also any economic rents that go to, say, specialized inputs or unique resources the firm uses. It's the total net benefit flowing to the production side.
Got it. So these two areas, CS and PS, often triangles on our graphs. They become like our measuring sticks.
Our policy currency, you could say. We add them together to get total welfare. Then we measure how CS, PS, and that total change whenever the price or the quantity moves away from that free market equilibrium, usually because of some government action.
Okay, theory makes sense. Let's ground this with the rental unit example from the notes. We need that baseline, that efficient market outcome, before we can measure any losses later.
Absolutely essential. So the notes give us these simple linear equations for the rental market. Supply. Q equals 10 times P, and demand. QD equals 30,000 minus 20 times P.
Okay, first step, find the equilibrium, where supply equals demand.
Right. Set Q's equal to QD. So 10P equals 30,000 minus 20P.
Right. Basic algebra. Add 20P to both sides. 30P equals 30,000.
Yep. Divide by 30. The equilibrium price, P star, is $1,000 per month.
And the quantity. Plug $1,000 back into either equation. Supply, 10 times 1,000 is 10,000. Demand, 30,000 minus 20 times 1,000.
Yeah.
Also 10,000.
So equilibrium is P star, $1,000, Q star equals 10,000 units. This is our efficient point. Maximum total surplus happens right here.
Now let's calculate that surplus. For consumer surplus, we need the area of that triangle above the $1,000 price line. We need the top point, the price where demand hits zero, right? The choke price.
Correct. Set QD to 0 in the demand equation. 0 equals 30,000 minus 20p. So 20p equals 40,000. Divide by 20, p equals $1,500. That's the max price anyone would pay.
Okay, so the height of the CS triangle is the difference between that max price, $1,500, and the equilibrium price, $1,000. That's $500.
Right. And the base of the triangle is the equilibrium quantity, 10,000 units.
Area of a triangle, 1/2 base times height. So 0.5 times 10,000 times 500.
Which comes out to $2,500,000, $2.5 million in consumer surplus.
Okay, now for producer surplus. The triangle below the price line. Here, the supply curve, QS, starts from the origin, right? Zero price, zero quantity.
Yeah, in this simple linear case, it does, which makes the PS calculation a bit easier. The height of the PS triangle is just the equilibrium price itself, $1,000.
And the base is still the quantity, 10,000.
So PS is 1/2 times 10,000 times 1,000.
That's $5 million. $5 million.
Exactly. So add them up. Total surplus in this efficient, unregulated market is $2.5 million plus $5 million.
$7.5 million. That's our benchmark.
That's the number. Every policy we look at, next rent control, taxes, whatever, will generate a total surplus less than this $7.5 million. The difference is the deadweight loss, the cost of the intervention, measured in cold, hard cash. And that $7.5 million figure leads us straight into the whole concept of economic efficiency. It's defined simply as maximizing that total pie, the sum of consumer and producer surplus.
So any outcome that doesn't hit that $7.5 million mark, in this example, is technically inefficient.
By definition, yes. It means there's some deadweight loss, some value lost to society.
Okay, but why? Why is the free competitive market outcome usually the most efficient one? It feels a bit like magic, doesn't it? The invisible hand and all that. Is there a core principle here?
There is. It hinges on the idea of Pareto efficiency, named after Vilfredo Pareto.
Okay, what's that?
An allocation of resources is Pareto efficient if, and this is key, it's impossible to make someone better off without making at least one other person worse off.
So if you can still make a trade that helps someone without hurting anyone, you're not Pareto efficient yet.
Exactly. If you're not Pareto efficient, it implies there are still some gains from trade left on the table, opportunities for win-win deals that haven't happened.
And the competitive market gets us there.
Under the right conditions, yes. That's the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. It basically states that a competitive equilibrium where supply equals demand freely automatically leads to a Pareto efficient outcome, assuming no market failures, which we'll get to.
Wow. So the free market outcome is inherently Pareto efficient. That's powerful.
It is. It establishes the competitive market as like the gold standard for efficiency.
And what's the mechanism? How does it ensure this? You mentioned it relates to price equaling marginal benefit and marginal cost.
Precisely. In a competitive market, consumers keep buying until the price equals their marginal benefit, the value of the last unit to them. Producers keep selling until the price equals their marginal cost, the cost of producing that last unit.
So at equilibrium, price equals MB and price equals MC.
Which means MB must equal MC. The value society places on the last unit produced is exactly equal to the cost of the resources used to make it.
And if MB were greater than MC,
society would be better off making more. The value exceeds the cost. We'd increase total surplus by producing more.
And if MC were greater than MB,
we've gone too far. We're spending more resources making something than it's actually worth to people. We should cut back production to increase total surplus. Only when MB equals MC are we maximizing the net benefits.
So the price isn't just for payment, it's like a signal conductor.
Exactly. The sources emphasize two vital roles prices play in achieving this efficiency. First, information. Prices bundle up vast amounts of information about value and cost, and they transmit it cheaply and effectively. While a consumer looks at a price and instantly knows how much society collectively values that good or the resources needed to make it. A producer sees the price and knows the value society places on their output relative to their production costs. It's incredibly efficient information transfer.
Okay, information. What's the second rule?
Incentives. Prices provide the carrot and the stick. The potential for profit encourages producers to make things people value. The cost motivates consumers to use resources wisely. These incentives guide self-interested individuals towards activities that unintentionally maximize overall social welfare.
The snowboard example in the notes really drives this home, doesn't it?
It's a great illustration. Imagine a sudden craze for snowboarding. Demand surges.
Price goes up.
Right. Immediately, that higher price is a signal. Maybe a company was making cross-country skis. They see the higher snowboard price and think, hey, we can make way more money switching production.
So they shift workers, maybe retool part of the factory.
Exactly. They chase the profit incentive, and poof, resources automatically flow from the less valued activity, making skis nobody wants right now, to the more highly valued one, making snowboards everyone's clamoring for.
And this happens without some central planner saying, okay, ski factory, make snowboards now.
Precisely. It's decentralized, automatic adjustment, driven entirely by price signals and incentives, constantly pushing the market back towards that efficient MBMC point. It's quite remarkable when you think about it.
Okay, so if competitive markets are so darn efficient, achieving this MBMC nirvana automatically, why do we even have a course like PP 5075? Why does the government intervene at all?
Ah, the million-dollar question. The readings point to two main justifications. First, sometimes the market itself breaks down. That's market failure. Second, sometimes the goal isn't efficiency, it's fairness or equity.
Let's take market failure first. When does the invisible hand fumble the ball?
A market failure happens when an unregulated competitive market doesn't achieve that efficient outcome. When MB doesn't equal MC, usually because the price signal is distorted or incomplete. There are three classic types you absolutely need to know.
Lay them on me.
Okay, first, monopoly or market power. If you have only one seller, or maybe just a few powerful ones acting together, they don't just take the market price, they can set the price.
Higher, usually.
Much higher. They restrict output below the efficient level, where PMC, and charge a price that's way above their marginal cost. Since price is greater than MC, it's inefficient. Society wants more, values it more than its cost, but the monopolists won't provide it because they want to keep the price high.
Yeah.
That creates deadweight loss.
Okay, market power, what's next?
Second, lack of information. If consumers don't really understand what they're buying, think complex drugs, maybe, or opaque financial products, they can't make rational choices that maximize their utility. The price signal is kind of meaningless if you don't know the quality or the risks.
So that justifies things like truth in advertising laws or FTA drug approvals.
Exactly. Interventions to ensure consumers have the information they need to make the price signal meaningful.
Makes sense. And the third one. This feels like a big one in policy.
Oh, it is. Externalities. This is when a market transaction creates a cost or a benefit for someone outside the transaction, a third party, who isn't compensated or charged for it.
Pollution is the classic negative example, right?
The classic. A factory makes chemicals, sells them at a price reflecting its private costs. But the pollution it dumps imposes a cost on the community health problems, environmental damage. That's an external cost. Because the market price ignores it, the factory produces too much chemical from society's point of view. The social cost is higher than the private cost reflected in the price.
And positive externalities.
Think vaccinations. When you get vaccinated, you protect yourself. Sure, that's the private benefit. But you also help protect the whole community by reducing disease spread. That community benefit is external. Because individuals only consider their private benefit, they might underinvest in vaccinations from society's perspective. Basic research is another example. The benefits spill over widely.
So in all these market failure cases, monopoly, bad info, externalities, the unregulated market doesn't hit MBMC, and there's a potential role for government to improve efficiency.
Correct. The intervention aims to correct the failure and push the market towards that efficient outcome.
Okay. But what about the second reason for intervention? When a market is efficient, but we intervene anyway. For fairness.
Right. This is the realm of equity. Sometimes society looks at the efficient market outcome and says, yeah, it's efficient, but it's not fair. Maybe the income distribution is too unequal.
And this often needs a trade-off with efficiency, doesn't it?
Almost always. The Welfare Possibilities Frontier, WPF, is the best way to visualize this. Imagine a graph showing the well-being or utility of two different groups, say, Group 1 and Group 2. The WPF curve shows all the possible combinations of their utility levels that are Pareto efficient.
So any point on that curve is efficient.
Yes. Points A, B, C on the frontier are all efficient. But to move along the curve, say from B to C, to make Group 2 better off, you must make Group 1 worse off. That's the efficiency trade-off.
And the really counterintuitive part is that a point way out at the edge where one group has almost everything can still be efficient.
Absolutely. Point A, where Group 1 has high utility and Group 2 has very little, could be perfectly Pareto efficient. You can't help Group 2 without taking something from Group 1. Efficiency says nothing about fairness or equality.
So how does society choose which efficient point it prefers? Or even choose an inefficient point inside the frontier?
That requires a social welfare function, SWF. It's basically a representation of society's values about how welfare should be distributed. It ranks different combinations of utility levels.
Like saying we prefer a more equal distribution, even if it's slightly inefficient.
Precisely. A policy like rent control might push the economy inside the WPF, creating deadweight loss inefficiency. But if society's SWF puts a high value on affordable housing for low-income groups, that inefficient point might be judged as socially better than an efficient but highly unequal point on the frontier.
So the deadweight loss is like the price we pay for achieving a preferred, equitable outcome.
That's a great way to put it. It quantifies the efficiency cost of pursuing equity goals.
Okay, let's put this CSPS machinery to work on some actual policies, starting with the most direct kind of intervention, price controls. First up, price ceilings, setting a maximum price below the market equilibrium.
Right. Think rent control in some cities, or those infamous gasoline price caps back in the 1970s. The government says you can't charge more than PMax.
And PMax is below the free market price, P0. What happens to welfare? Let's use figure 9.2 from the readings.
Okay, so the lower price looks good for some consumers. Those lucky enough to still get the good, which is now quantity Q1, since supply shrinks at the lower price, they pay less. Their gain is that rectangle labeled A. They get a transfer from producers.
What is this?
Big catch. The quantity supplied falls from Q0 down to Q1, so fewer units are available. Some consumers who would have bought at P0 are now shut out. They lose the surplus they would have gotten. That's represented by triangle B.
So the net effect on consumers is uncertain. Could be positive, could be negative.
Exactly. The changing consumer surplus is A minus B. It depends on the relative sizes of that transfer gain, A, and the rationing loss, B.
Okay, what about producers?
They lose unequivocally. They lose rectangle A because they get a lower price on the Q1 units they still sell, and they lose triangle C because they're forced to cut production from Q0 to Q1, losing the surplus they would have earned on those units. So their total change is minus A minus C.
And the overall societal impact, the deadweight loss.
Add the consumer change, AB, and the producer change, AEC. The A's cancel out. You're left with minus B minus C. Those two triangles, B and C together, represent the deadweight loss, DAWL.
That's the value that just evaporates, right? The gains from trades between Q1 and Q0 that would have happened but are now illegal because of the price cap.
Precisely. It's the pure efficiency cost of the policy. The loss to producers and rationed out consumers is bigger than the gain to the consumers who get the lower price.
Now, the readings make a really important point about who actually gets the limited supply, Q1. The DWL calculation assumes the right people get it.
Yes, it assumes the consumers who value the good the most, those highest up on the demand curve, are the ones who manage to buy the Q1 units. But in reality, rationing might be based on waiting in line, or who you know, or just luck.
So someone who only valued the good slightly above PMax gets it, while someone who valued it much higher misses out.
Then the actual loss in consumer surplus is even larger than triangle B suggests. And the transfer gain A might not be going to the neediest consumers. The real-world DWL can be much worse than the simple geometric calculation.
And there's that special case in figure 9.3 when demand is really inelastic, like gasoline in the short run.
Right. If demand is very inelastic, consumers desperately need the good and can't easily cut back. When the price ceiling causes supply to drop, Q0 to Q1, the value of those lost units, triangle B, can become huge GE, much larger than the transfer gain, rectangle A, from the lower price.
Meaning the net change for consumers, AB, could actually be negative.
Yes, the policy designed to help consumers ends up hurting them overall because the shortage is so severe and the lost value B is so great. That was arguably the situation with the 1970s gas lines.
Let's look at the natural gas example 9.1. The math gets complex, but the result is staggering.
It does. Using those estimated supply and demand equations, they found the free market equilibrium was about $6.40 per MSF. If a ceiling of $3 was imposed, supply would fall significantly.
And the welfare effects.
They calculated the net gain for consumers, AB, was a massive $68.44 billion per year. But producers lost even more, A plus C came out to a negative $74.12 billion.
So the difference.
It's a deadweight loss. B plus C equals $5.68 billion annually. That's nearly $6 billion of lost value every year because of that price regulation. It shows how these simple triangles can translate into enormous real-world costs.
Now, the kidney market example, 9.2,
Mhm.
this pushes the analysis into really difficult ethical territory, doesn't it? The U.S. effectively has a price ceiling of 0.
It does. The National Organ Transplantation Act bans payment for organs, so the price is legally 0. The economic model estimates a potential market equilibrium around $20,000 per kidney, clearing about 24,000 kidneys a year.
But at a price of 0, this applies much lower, maybe 16,000 from donations.
Right. The model calculates the loss to potential suppliers, people who would donate for payment but can't, as area A plus C, about $400 million.
Okay. And the standard DWL calculation, B plus C, is around $160 million. But does $160 million really capture the cost here? People are dying on waiting lists.
That's the critical limitation. The $160 million is just the lost monetary surplus from trades that didn't happen. It absolutely does not capture the immense human cost, the suffering, the deaths, the reduced quality of life caused by the chronic shortage.
So the policy goal is clearly equity preventing a market where the rich buy organs from the poor.
Undeniably. But the efficiency cost, if you could somehow value the lives lost and suffering caused by the shortage, is arguably far, far greater than that $160 million DWL figure suggests. It's a stark example of the efficiency-equity trade-off reaching an extreme.
Let's switch gears to the opposite, price floors. Minimum price is set above the equilibrium, like minimum wage or agricultural price supports.
Okay, price floors, figure 9.7. Here, the government mandates a price P-min that's higher than the free market P0. This causes an excess supply. Quantity supplied, Q2, is greater than quantity demanded, Q3.
What happens to welfare? Consumers first.
Consumers clearly lose. They have to pay a higher price, P-min, instead of P0, and they buy less, Q3, instead of Q0. Their loss is area A plus area B, so AB.
And producers. It seems like they should gain from the higher price.
It's complicated. They definitely gain rectangle A, which is a transfer from consumers due to the higher price on the Q3 units they sell. But they lose triangle C because their sales fall from Q0 to Q3.
Okay, so gain A, lose C. Is that it?
Not necessarily. Here's the kicker. Producers might ramp up production all the way to Q2 because the price P-min is so attractive, but they can only sell Q3. What about the cost of producing that unsold surplus, Q2, Q3?
That cost is represented by that trapezoid D in the diagram.
Exactly. That's wasted resources, producing stuff nobody buys at that price. So the net change in producer surplus is actually A minus C minus D.
Wow. So if that cost of unsold surpluses D is really big, producers could actually end up worse off overall from the price floor.
It's entirely possible. The policy intended to help them could backfire if it encourages massive, costly overproduction that can't be sold.
The airline regulation example, 9.3, before deregulation sounds exactly like this.
Textbook case. The Civil Aeronautics Board, CAB, set high minimum fares. Airlines couldn't compete on price, so what did they do?
Competed on everything else. Fancy meals, more flights, empty seats.
Precisely. They offered excessive service frequency and quality, trying to lure the limited number of passengers, Q3, willing to pay the high fares. This meant flying planes half empty, huge operating costs. That was their massive trapezoid D.
So even though ticket prices were high, giving them area A, the costs of competing on non-price dimensions, D, ate away at their profits.
Very likely. Deregulation allowed prices to fall, huge gain, A plus B for consumers, forced airlines to compete on efficiency, filled up planes, and likely led to a much healthier industry overall, despite initial fears. It eliminated that wasteful D component.
Okay, sticking with agriculture for a moment. Instead of just setting a minimum price floor and letting surplus pile up unsold, what if the government steps in and buys the surplus? That's a price support, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Common in U.S. and EU farm policy historically. The government sets a support price, PS, above the equilibrium P0. And crucially, it promises to buy however much producers supply at that price that consumers don't buy.
So looking at figure 9.10, the government sets PS. Consumers only demand Q1 at that high price. Producers, encouraged by PS, want to supply it all the way out to Q2.
Right, so the government has to buy the difference. QG equals Q2, Q1.
Let's track the welfare. Consumers pay PS, buy Q1. They lose area A and B compared to the free market. So AB.
Producers are happy. They sell a larger quantity Q2, Q1 to consumers, Q2 to the government, and they get the high price PS for all of it. They gain A plus B plus D.
Okay, producers gain A plus B plus D, consumers lose A plus B. But what about the government? This sounds expensive.
Hugely expensive. The government cost is the price it pays, PS, times the quantity it buys, Q2, Q1. That's the entire area of that big speckled rectangle in the figure.
So the total change in welfare is producer gain, A plus B plus D, minus consumer loss, A plus B minus government cost, PS, Q2, Q1.
Which simplifies to D minus the government cost rectangle. Since that rectangle is always much bigger than triangle D, society is significantly worse off. The cost to consumers and taxpayers vastly exceeds the benefit to producers.
And the economic critique here is pretty scathing, isn't it?
It is. Why spend billions buying surplus grain or milk, storing it, sometimes even destroying it? If the goal is just to help farmers' incomes, why not just give them a direct cash payment equal to A plus B plus D?
That would achieve the same income boost for farmers.
But it would save society the entire cost of the government purchases minus D. It's far, far more efficient. Price supports are a very inefficient way to transfer income.
The wheat support example 9.4 puts numbers on this, raising the price just a little bit.
Yeah, from $3.46 to $3.70 back in 1981, it cost consumers $624 million and the government $451 million in purchases. Total cost over $1 billion.
Just to get producers an extra $638 million. Ouch.
Exactly. You spent over $1 billion to deliver less than 2/3 of that in actual benefit.
Okay, another way to raise prices for producers, production quotas. Instead of messing with price directly, just limit supply.
Right, like acreage limits for farmers or the taxi medallions we'll talk about. The government mandates that total quantity cannot exceed Q1, which is less than the equilibrium Q0.
Graphically, figure 9.11, this makes the supply curve vertical at Q1, right?
Effectively, yes. Supply becomes perfectly inelastic at Q1. This forces the market price up to P1, where the demand curve intersects this vertical supply.
Welfare effects.
Yeah.
Consumers pay more, P1, get less, Q1, they lose 8AB.
Producers get the higher price P1, so they gain rectangle A, but they sell less quantity Q1 instead of Q0, so they lose the surplus they would have made on those units, which is triangle C. Net change for producers is A minus C.
And the deadweight loss?
Add them up. Net A plus equals an ABC. Same DWL areas as the price ceiling, interestingly, just distributed differently.
The NYC taxi medallion example, 9.5, is just mind-blowing here. A quota basically unchanged since 1937.
Incredible, isn't it? Only 13,150 medallions. This extreme supply restriction forces fares up and creates chronic taxi shortages. But for those lucky enough to own a medallion,
It's like winning the lottery.
pretty much. The artificial scarcity created by the quota drove the market price of a single medallion up to around $880,000 by 2011. That's the capitalized value of that transfer payment, Area A, that medallion owners extract from consumers year after year, purely due to the quota.
Plus the deadweight loss B plus C from people who can't get a taxi when they need one or pay inflated fares.
Exactly. Huge inefficiency and a massive transfer of wealth created entirely by government supply restriction.
Okay, let's apply this to international trade. Tariffs and import quotas. Both aim to protect domestic industries from cheaper foreign goods, right? World price PW is below the domestic equilibrium price.
Correct. Both policies work by raising the domestic price from the low world price PW up to some higher price P. Let's look at figure 9.15.
What's the damage to consumers? They now pay P instead of PW. They lose big time.
Huge loss. Areas A, B, C, and D, so BA plus B plus D.
What about domestic producers? They get the higher price P and increase their output.
They gain. They get Area A transferred to them, so plus A for domestic producers.
Okay, consumers lose A plus B plus C plus D. Domestic producers gain A. What happens to B, C, and D? Here's where tariffs and quotas differ, right?
This is the crucial difference. If it's a tariff, a tax per unit imported, the government collects revenue on the imports. That revenue is equal to the tariff amount times the quantity imported, which is Area D.
So with a tariff, A goes to producers, D goes to the government. The net loss to the domestic economy is just B plus C. Those are the standard deadweight loss triangles from distorting production and consumption.
Exactly. DWL equals B plus C under a tariff. But if it's a quota, a physical limit on the number of imports allowed,
Who gets Area D then?
it typically goes to whoever holds the license to import under the quota. Often these are foreign producers or governments. They get to buy at the low world price PW and sell at the high domestic price P, pocketing the difference. That rectangle D becomes quota rents flowing out of the country.
So under a quota, A goes to domestic producers, but D goes to foreigners. The net loss to the domestic economy is B plus C plus D.
Precisely. Which means, from the importing country's perspective, a quota is unambiguously worse than a tariff that achieves the same level of protection, the same price P. You lose D entirely with the quota.
The sugar quota, example 9.6, really highlights this loss.
Oh, yeah. In 2010, the quota boosted the U.S. sugar price by about 12 cents a pound. The total cost to U.S. consumers, estimated at $2.9 billion a year.
Oof. How much did U.S. producers gain?
About $1.4 billion, Area A. The standard deadweight loss, B plus C, was around $614 million.
But the big kicker was Area D, the quota rents.
That was $836 million. Nearly $1 billion transferred effectively from U.S. consumers to foreign sugar producers who held the quota rates. Because the U.S. used a quota instead of a tariff, the country essentially threw away $836 million that could have been government revenue.
All right, last major policy area, taxes and subsidies. Let's start with taxes, probably the most common government intervention. Say the government puts a $1 tax on, I don't know, widgets. Does the price just go up by $1?
Almost never. That's a common misconception. The price the buyer pays, PB, will go up, and the price the seller receives, PS, will go down, and the difference between them, PBQS, will equal the tax. But the burden usually gets shared.
So the economic incidence who actually bears the cost isn't necessarily the same as the statutory incidence who physically sends the check to the government.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if the law says buyers pay the tax or sellers pay the tax.
Right.
The market outcome, the final PBP, and thus who bears the burden, will be the same either way.
So if the law doesn't matter, what does determine who pays more of the tax?
Simple. Elasticity. It all comes down to the relative elasticities of supply and demand.
How does that work?
The side of the market that is relatively more inelastic, meaning less responsive to price changes, fewer substitutes available, bears the larger share of the tax burden. They can't easily adjust their behavior to avoid the tax.
So if demand is very inelastic, like cigarettes maybe, buyers pay most of the tax.
Yep. Buyers don't cut back much when price rises, so the price just goes up by almost the full tax amount. If demand is very elastic, buyers have lots of alternatives. They'll flee if the price rises much, so sellers end up having to absorb most of the tax by accepting a lower PS.
Is there a formula for this?
There is. The fraction of the tax that gets passed through to consumers in the form of a higher price, PB, is given by S divided by S minus ED, where S is the price elasticity of supply and E is the price elasticity of demand, which is usually negative.
Okay, let's use the gasoline tax example, 9.7. They assume a $1 tax, and intermediate elasticities of S equals 0.4 and ED equals 0.5.
Right. Plug those into the formula. Pass-through fraction equals 0.4. Net 0.5, that's 0.4 divided by 0.9.
Which is about 0.44 or 44%.
Exactly. So only 44 cents of the $1 tax gets passed on to consumers. If the pre-tax price was $2, the buyer price P goes up to $2.44.
And the other 56 cents.
That's borne by the producers. The price they receive, PS, falls from $2 down to $1.44. $2.44, 1.44 equals $1 tax. The burden is split 44.56.
Okay, so the burden is shared. The government collects revenue, the tax per unit times the new lower quantity sold. That was estimated at $89 billion a year in the example.
Right. But importantly, the total loss in consumer surplus and producer surplus is always bigger than the tax revenue collected.
That difference is the deadweight laws again, isn't it? Those triangles B and C in figure 9.17.
It is. For this hypothetical $1 gas tax, the DWL was calculated at $5.5 billion annually. So the government gets $89 billion in revenue, but the total cost to society, the reduction in overall welfare, is $89 billion plus another $5.5 billion in lost efficiency.
And the size of that DWL depends on elasticities too.
Absolutely. The more elastic supply or demand are, the bigger the quantity reduction caused by the tax, and the larger the deadweight loss triangles B and C become.
And crucially, the reading emphasizes that DWL increases with the square of the tax rate.
Yes, this is fundamental. DWL is proportional to T squared. Double the tax rate. You don't just double the DWL, you roughly quadruple it. Triple the tax rate, DWL goes up 9 times.
Wow. That has huge implications for designing tax systems.
Massive. It's why economists generally favor broad-based taxes at low rates over taxing just a few things at very high rates. High rates create exponentially larger distortions and efficiency losses.
This also leads to the inverse elasticity rule for efficient taxation.
It does. If your only goal was to raise a certain amount of revenue with the absolute minimum deadweight loss, the theory says you should tax goods with the most inelastic demand more heavily.
because inelastic demand means quantity doesn't drop much, so the DWL triangle stays small.
Exactly. But what kinds of goods have inelastic demand?
Necessities, usually. Food, fuel, basic housing. Stuff people can't easily do without.
Right. So an efficient tax system, according to this rule, would likely be highly regressive, hitting lower income people harder as a percentage of their income.
While taxing luxuries, which have elastic demand, would be inefficient, but perhaps fairer.
That's the core tension again. Efficiency often points one way, tax necessities, while equity points the other, tax luxuries or income more progressively. Tax policy is constantly wrestling with this trade-off. The economist calculates the DWL, the policymaker decides how much DWL is acceptable to achieve a desired level of fairness.
Okay, just quickly then, the opposite of a tax is a subsidy.
Yeah, a subsidy is just a negative tax, like the government paying farmers to grow corn. It lowers the price for buyers, raises the price received by sellers, and increases the quantity.
And who gets most of the benefit?
Same elasticity rules apply, just in reverse. The side of the market with the relatively more inelastic curve captures the larger share of the subsidy's benefit. If demand is inelastic and supply is elastic, most of the subsidy effectively goes to consumers via a lower price. If supply is inelastic and demand is elastic, producers capture most of it. Hashtag tag outro.
Well, that was quite a journey. We really moved from just describing markets to actually evaluating them using these powerful tools, consumer and producer surplus.
Yeah, it's amazing how these simple geometric areas on a supply-demand graph let us put real dollar figures on the consequences of policy.
We've seen how they quantify the gains and losses from everything from, gas price caps and kidney markets.
To sugar quotas and gasoline taxes, it gives us a consistent framework.
And the big takeaway seems to be that competitive markets, left alone, tend to maximize that total surplus, that overall economic pie.
That's the benchmark, yes. The first welfare theorem tells us that. And almost every intervention we looked at, price controls, quotas, taxes, creates some inefficiencies, some deadweight loss by driving a wedge between marginal benefit and marginal cost.
Which doesn't mean those interventions are always wrong, but it means they come at a cost. And efficiency cost we can now measure.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating, I think, is how often policies designed with good intentions, say, to help a specific group like farmers with price supports, end up costing society way more than the actual benefit delivered to that group.
Yeah, the inefficiency can be staggering. Politics sometimes trumps pure economic efficiency.
Often does. Which brings us back to that core dilemma, especially for things like the minimum wage, which we didn't analyze in detail but fits the price floor model.
Right. The standard model shows a deadweight loss, jobs lost, value destroyed.
Correct. But the entire debate then hinges on whether you view that primarily as an efficiency issue focusing on the DWL or as an equity issue focusing on transferring income to low-wage workers who keep their jobs.
So the final provocative thought for you, the listener, is really about that trade-off. How much measured inefficiency, how much deadweight loss is society willing to accept to achieve an outcome that it perceives as fairer or more just?
That calculation, that balancing act between the dollars and cents of efficiency measured by CS and PS and the often unquantifiable values of equity and fairness, that's really the heart of economic policy analysis, isn't it? There's rarely an easy answer.